the New York Times reported that the CDC is withholding large portions of COVID data, specifically information on vaccine boosters. Now, I know I'm a little bit late in reporting this to you, but it's important, so I want to get it out here. But this was a couple of weeks ago, towards around the 22nd of February, I believe. But the CDC is refusing to release the data because they say the data will be possibly misinterpreted. The spokeswoman for the CDC said that the data is not yet ready for prime time because they want to be able to comb through it, I guess, and frame it in a way so that you don't look at it and say, oh, the vaccine boosters were ineffective. So, yeah, this is how it goes in today's world. The agency published significant data on the effectiveness of boosters in adults for those younger than 65, but they left out the numbers for 18 to 49-year-olds, which is obviously a giant portion of the population. So they were pushing boosters, saying everybody needs a booster, everybody needs a booster. And then people got the booster, and now they're saying, well, we don't need to show you how effective that actually was. But what is so suspicious of that, about that, and what makes us think they must not have been that effective for 18 to 49-year-olds is the fact that they released the data for under 65. So they released it for 50 to 65-year-olds, and they said, see, it makes a difference. But this isn't actually new news because there's actually even data showing that the vaccination itself was, when you're under the age of 50, there was some, of course, this is still debated and contested, but some of the data showed that even under the age of 50, vaccination itself was not a net positive. And then at the age of 50, it was a wash. And then anything above 50, it was a net positive to get vaccinated. So same, it looks like must be the case for the boosters, because if they're not releasing the data for 18 to 49-year-olds, they don't want you to see it for a reason. The CDC did say that, the data only represents 10% of the population. Okay, fine. Well, the CDC has barely been publishing any data for the past 2 years, despite collecting information. We now know that they've been collecting data. They've been collecting data on wastewater. They've been collecting data on vaccinated breakthrough cases, but they won't release any of it. They don't want to share with us what's going on. The wastewater issue, they don't want to share with us, which is very interesting and suspicious because, like Florida, we found out that there was a lot of Omicron in their wastewater, yet they were not seeing spikes in cases or hospitalizations. They weren't really testing. People weren't getting that sick, yet they were seeing tons of Omicron in the wastewater. Well, you don't want to release the wastewater data because you want people to think a certain strategy is effective. They didn't want to show that, Florida, which was not as vaccinated as other places, wasn't getting hit hard. It's all, so, very frustrating, extremely, extremely frustrating on how they're releasing the data, how politicized all of this has been. What data they're not releasing is more important. But the CDC did, I will give them some credit here, the CDC did release new data showing a total of 1,071,856 reports of adverse events following COVID vaccines. These were submitted between December 14th, 2020 and January 21st, 2022 to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is known as VAERS. And VAERS is the primary government-funded system for reporting adverse vaccine reactions in the United States. But it's voluntary. It's totally voluntary. So just anecdotally, even in my own life, I know a couple of people who had to seek medical care for their vaccines. After they got vaccines, they had maybe really bad inflammation in their musculoskeletal system or menstrual cycle disruptions, and they did not report this to VAERS. So it is a voluntary system. If they've got 1 million reports in the course of that year, then who knows how many there actually were? That's a big question a lot of people have. But the data did include a total of 22,607 deaths and 178,994 reports of serious injury. So that's a lot. That's a lot. Now, let's see here. Here's some more data. This is from December 14th, 2020 to January 21st, 2022. So this is like 13 months. Shows 21% of deaths were related to cardiac disorders. 54% of those who died were male. 41% were female. And the remaining death reports did not include gender of the deceased. But the average age of death was 72.7%. So, that's interesting. It seems if that's the case with the vaccine, that it was that the average age is 72. That is still lower than the average age of COVID deaths. So that's something to keep in mind. But would really like to see that data really parsed out. So I'd like to see how many younger people died and older people in that vaccination group that they think people who actually did die of the vaccine. And people are dying of the vaccine. I mean, you could debate whether or not it's how rare it is. You could debate whether or not there's still a benefit to getting vaccinated, and the risk outweighs the reward outweighs the risk. You could definitely debate that. But people do die from the vaccine, so it is completely false to say nobody does, right? That's a false statement. The question is, how prevalent is it actually, and what is the risk truly? Now, going back to the data here, as of January 21st, 4,925 pregnant women reported adverse events related to COVID vaccines, including 1,575 reports of miscarriage or premature birth. And there were 3,474 cases of Bell's palsy reported. Now, remember, that's what everybody was accusing Gavin Newsom of potentially having. And I do know somebody who had that. I know of somebody who knows somebody. So I was speaking to somebody at one point, and they were like, "Oh yeah, my niece ended up with that Bell's palsy thing." So I've heard of people getting it. I don't know anyone personally who actually had it, but it doesn't seem like it's that rare. So I think the number's probably higher than that 3,474. But again, that's what was reported. 12,704 reports of blood clotting disorders in the U.S. That's astonishing. That is a really high number. So when you look at these other numbers, 12,704 reports of blood clotting, and yet we're not even talking about that. People are talking mostly about myocarditis, but they're not talking about blood clotting. And that is, but the VAERS database shows that there's more blood clotting than anything else. So that needs to be looked into. Of those, 5,646 were attributed to Pfizer, 4,521 to Moderna, and 2,490 to J&J. Again, that's also, now J&J, it looks like the risk is higher because there were fewer doses of J&J given out, and yet they've got 2,490 reports of the blood clotting. But there still were quite a few with Pfizer and Moderna. So that needs to be looked into. That really does need to be looked into. 3,817 cases of myocarditis and pericarditis, with 2,348 cases attributed to Pfizer, 1,293 cases to Moderna, and 164 cases to J&J's COVID vaccines. So again, VAERS, totally voluntary. Can't stress that enough. And also, that means that they're going to get some wrong. Some people are going to think the vaccine did something to them, and it didn't. But the average person doesn't know how to report to VAERS usually. That's something that like your medical professional, a nurse would do for you. I'm sure there are people doing it. But of course, there could be some people who think something happened because of the vaccine. It just was coincidental. But again, there's a lot of people who did have something happen after vaccination and they didn't report it at all. So let's talk about stock, because now stocks are starting to go down. Crashing, in fact, for Moderna. Moderna's stock is down 70%. Pfizer's is down 19%. And Pfizer is going up slightly, so they're on mostly a downward trend, but they're not as bad as Moderna. And it's, I think, because Pfizer has their Pfizer-Mectin, I don't remember the actual name of it, but their antiviral pill. So I'm expecting Pfizer stock to go up a bit, only because even yesterday for Biden's State of the Union address, he mentioned that the government's buying all these millions of doses of this Pfizer-Mectin. And if you go to the pharmacy and you test positive for COVID, they will give you that pill, that antiviral round, right then and there for free. So not for free, we pay for it, our tax dollars is paying for it. But my guess is Pfizer's going to go up slightly because of that. But on the flip side, in India, Pfizer has pulled its application for emergency use. They didn't want to be denied, so they pulled their application in advance. And the reason is India started asking them for some safety data. They were like, we want to see some safety data. We'd also like to see some immunogenicity. I'm not saying that right. Immunogenicity data, which means how well does the vaccine create an actual immune response to the virus. So they wanted to see this data, and Pfizer instead said, we'll just pull our application. We just want, never mind. Pretend like we were never even here. So And, we've got that big data dump, still going through all that data. There's 10,000 pages of data from the Pfizer application for approving the vaccine to become fully approved. So when the FDA fully approved Pfizer, not just emergency use authorization, but actual approval, Pfizer had to deliver to them tons and tons of data. It was like 400,000 pages of data. Well, a group of scientists said, we'd like to see that data using the Freedom of Information Act. And the FDA said, oh, okay, but it's going to take us 55 years to get you all of that data. Well, a Texas federal judge says, bull crap on that. It took you guys weeks to go through it, just weeks to go through it to give Pfizer the approval. So don't tell us it's going to take 55 years to give it to the public. So they now have months to give it to us. So we don't get it in weeks. We're not getting it overnight, but that data is rolling out slowly between now and the end of September. So we were given 10,000 pages yesterday. We'll get another 10,000 pages April 1st. We'll get, I think, then 80,000 pages like in May, and then it goes down to 55,000 pages each month until they give us the whole 400,000 pages, which I think is to the end of September. So that data is starting to come out. There was a lot of attempts to block that data. I think there's a lot of people that are then implicated if this data comes out and the data is not that solid. Then you got to look at Pfizer, of course, but then you can't totally blame Pfizer, right? They're a company trying to make money. Their job is not to protect the American people. That's the FDA's job. So then it turns to the FDA and you say, hey, you've got a problem because you approved this and this data is spotty. We don't know yet if the data is spotty, but that's a possibility. And we've got to comb through all this data, and we'll know between now and the end of the year what the truth is, because there's going to be a team of scientists going through each page of this data, like with a fine-tooth comb to see what actually, how well the vaccine worked. So, but it is interesting that Pfizer, when asked for this data, decided to pull it from India. I doubt they have as much sway in the Indian government. I doubt that they're bought off as much as our government is. And certainly our FDA is very embedded with Big Pharma. They take a lot of money from Big Pharma in order to continue operating. So it's not like that in other places in the world. And that has caused them to then pull that application and say, we'd rather pull it than you deny it. Because if you deny it, then it's a real problem for us. So that is the latest of what is going on there. And I will keep you posted, of course, with the data as we come through it. And anything else that is coming out. We're kind of at that point now in the pandemic where people are getting over it. People want to go back to life. We're seeing State of the Union address. Barely anybody was wearing a mask. People are wanting to move on with their life and just kind of forget about the pandemic. But we do need to be holding the people accountable who really made terrible decisions, who withheld data, who gaslit the American public, who lied to the American public and the world. We need to hold them accountable, so we can't lose sight of this. And we need to keep it on the forefront of the consciousness, the American consciousness, so that we could continue to, so that we don't repeat this, whatever this was. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, questions, you can email me, kim@kimiverson.com. Be sure to follow me on Locals, Rumble, YouTube, Rockfin, and I will see you next time.